What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my first draft of the 2023-24 season. Obviously, the game week 1 deadline is still quite far away, so nothing's locked in just yet. But I am going to talk about the players I've selected, why that is, and also some alternatives that I'll be looking at as well. I also wanted to let you know that I have partnered with Fantasy Football Hub for this season. They've got loads of members articles, Opta stats, and tools to help you do better at FPL. If you want to check them out, there is a link in the description below. I'll be showing you the tools and stuff as we go through the videos in pre-season and throughout kind of the season as well. It's currently up to 50% off, so make sure you check out that link in the description below. Alright, let's take a look at the defensive options, and I am on a 3-5-2 formation, mostly because there's so many good midfielders to pick from this season. The only downside is having to choose a 4.5 million forward, because unless we get lucky, they just don't tend to get any minutes, and therefore they're no good to us off the bench. But I think as long as you've got 2 playing defenders alongside them, it's not really that much of an issue. Now in goal, I've gone for Pickford. That's really just a placeholder for a 4.5 million goalkeeper. I think that's the amount of money that I want to spend on that position. There's other players that are more expensive that you could think about. Ramsdale, Kepa, Edison, for example. But I think I'm probably going to spend 4.5, and I think we're going to have quite a few options to choose from. The reason I've put Pickford in straight away is because we know he's nailed on, and Everton's fixtures are pretty good. But I am concerned about how good their defence is. And if you look at Brighton, for example, Steele ended the season as the #1 choice. He's only 4.5 million, and the Brighton defence is definitely better than Everton. And even if Verbruggen is the #1, he's also 4.5 million. So as long as De Zerbi tells us who is going to be their starting keeper, we can get a Brighton goalkeeper for just 4.5. Another team to think about is Brentford. Now, Ray has been excellent as an FPL goalkeeper at 4.5 million, so much so that he's up to 5 million this year. Fair enough, but there's lots of talk about him wanting to leave the club this summer, and if he does, presumably Flekken, who they've just signed, will be the new #1. So all of a sudden, FPL think that Brentford's goalkeeper is worth 5 million, but Flekken is only 4.5, so he's going to be an option as well. So Pickford's in there because right now I'm confident he's definitely going to start the season as #1 as long as he's still at the club, but there's definitely going to be other 4.5s to kind of think about. I've got Areola on the bench because he's only 4 million at West Ham, and there is talk that he might start the season as #1. If you wanted to guarantee a goalkeeper for just 9.5 million, so 4.5 plus a 4, you could go for Fabianski and Areola and just kind of commit to West Ham defence. But for now, I've gone for Pickford. One defender that I don't have in this team that a lot of people do is Luke Shaw, and I really like him. I will try and fit him in by the time we get to game week 1. But for this particular draft, I've gone for Gabriel instead because he's come in 0.5 million cheaper. I actually thought that him and Zinchenko and Saliba were all going to be 5.5, but for some reason Ben White is the one that's 5.5. But I think Gabriel is pretty much nailed on. He's also a threat from set pieces, and Man United defence is great, but so is Arsenal. And interestingly, if you look on Fantasy Football Hub, as part of their membership, they've got a fixture analyzer. Now I'm going to do the first 8 game weeks, and you can order the fixtures by how good they are from a defensive point of view. And straight away, Everton are right at the top, and you've got Man United in 4th place. And Arsenal are quite far down. But when you order it by clean sheets, which also then takes in the strength of the team you're playing for, i.e. Gabriel is an Arsenal defender, well, suddenly Arsenal are in 3rd place, Man United a little bit further down, and kind of Everton are nowhere to be seen, but Brighton are in 4th place. So that's why I'm thinking if Steele or Verbruggen is the #1, probably better than Pickford. And if I really need to save 0.5 million, going for Gabriel over Luke Shaw is probably a decision I can make as well. So that is something to think about and why he is in there as it stands. Estepinian, like I said, really like Brighton's fixtures. He's very attacking, and I just don't see why you would go for a different Brighton defender. Like Lewis Dunk is nailed on, but he's also 5 million. So unless he was cheaper, there's just nothing really to think about there. Like Estepinian's way more attacking. Of course, Brighton might sign a new left back during the summer, which could put a bit of competition there. You know, maybe reduce Estepinian's minutes. But as things stand, things are looking pretty good. And then I have got Trent in there. And it was funny because when he was 7.5 million, I thought I was definitely going to have him. But now he's 8 million. I'm thinking, could I have Luke Shaw in there instead? Save myself 2.5 million and just use that elsewhere. That is definitely something I'm considering. But obviously, we know what Trent is capable of. And while he's playing in this new role where he's going into midfield, extremely attacking, I just don't think I can kind of turn it down. In terms of the fixtures that he has, you know, you got Chelsea away. Bournemouth at home is pretty good. But I don't know. I just look at the first 4 fixtures and just think Chelsea and Newcastle and even maybe Villa are all fully capable of scoring against Liverpool. Spurs away game week 7. I just don't know how many clean sheets are there. I know what people will say. It's not just about the clean sheets with Trent. You've got that attacking potential. But he is also 8 million. So if you watched my videos last year, you know how kind of pro-Liverpool I am from an FPL point of view. But even I'm not fully convinced. So I think I probably will start the season with him. But he's by no stretch locked in just because of the price. And I'm just wondering whether I could spread the money around instead. The only thing by not starting with players like Trent, they're much more difficult to get to if you need them later on because you've usually got to make 2 transfers. So that's just something to think about. In terms of the bench, Botman playing for a Champions League team in Newcastle for 4.5 feels pretty cheap, especially when he's 2 million less than Trippier. And I've gone for Fofana just because I'm expecting an increase in output from Chelsea players this year. And I think he's probably going to be fairly nailed, but they do have a lot of centre-backs, so I think I'll probably go in the end for someone else, like a Tyrone Mings maybe. I don't know, whichever other 4.5 million defender looks nailed on from a fairly decent team. But if it looks like Fofana is going to be first choice, then getting a Chelsea defender for 4.5, yes, they finished 12th, but I'm expecting improvement under Pochettino, so that's why he's in right now. But I don't know, I looked at my first draft from last season, 6 of the first 11 made my team selection in game week 1. This year, there's just loads of players I'm not fully sure about. But overall, I think that's pretty solid. Luke Shaw is the one that I would want to fit in there as well. Next up, it's the 5-man midfield, and we'll start off with Bukayo Saka, who's probably one of the only players in this draft where I'm like 99.99% confident that he'll still be in my team by the time we get to the game week 1 deadline. That's how much I rate him. And if you look at the Arsenal fixtures, they got Forest at home to start the season, then it's Palace away, Fulham at home, Man United at home. So they got 3 home fixtures in the first 4 game weeks. Then it's Everton away, Spurs at home, Bournemouth away. So there's quite a few poor defences in there. And the hardest fixtures are probably Man United and Spurs, and they're both at home. So that's not going to phase this Arsenal attack. So I want one of their attackers, if not 2, if I can. And Saka at 8.5 million, I think is quite cheap. When I saw Odegaard was 8.5, I thought, well, Saka's going to be 9 or 9.5 because he's their penalty taker, and that's not the case. So given that he's absolutely secure for minutes and he takes penalties, I think he has to be in the team. I know a lot of people like Odegaard, and I like him as well. I just think if I'm looking at those 2 players and I can only pick one, who's going to repeat what they did last year next season? I'd put more money on Saka than Odegaard, especially when you're the first choice penalty taker as well. So he's definitely in the team. I think Mitoma is one of the picks of the 6.5 million midfielder bracket. Brighton attack, extremely good. Brighton's fixture's very good as well. They open with Luton at home. I think you've got Mitoma, Gross and Solly March all the same price. It's kind of take your pick. Last year, Mitoma was my favourite. I'm going to continue that choice going into this season. That's why he's in. With Rashford, I feel like I need a Man United attacker given how good their fixtures are. Again, if we look at the fixture analyzer on Fantasy Football Hub, by the way, if you want to check out all the tools, obviously you've got that link in the description below. Make sure you sign up ahead of the new season. You can go on attack, like order the fixtures by attack for the first 8 game weeks, and Man United are second. You've got Wolves at home, Forest at home, another home game. Although against Brighton, not an easy fixture, it's still at Old Trafford. You've got Palace, Brentford, and even the away games include one against Burnley, obviously newly promoted. And Rashford was one of the main attacking options for Man United last year. There is the option to go for Fernandes instead for 0.5 million less. He's also on penalties, and that is something to think about. But penalties are not predictable. Like, it could be that Man United go the first 10 game weeks without getting one, Meanwhile, from open play, you're much more likely to get a goal from Rashford. So that's the thing to think about. Like, it could be that Man United get 3 or 4 penalties in the first 10 game weeks, and then you look like a genius if you've gone for Fernandes. And I do think he's a good option in his own right. Like, if you wanted to double up on the Man United attack, obviously it would be Rashford and Fernandes. But if I'm just going to go for one, right now it's Rashford. In Mbeumo, like Matoma, great option for 6.5 million. With Tony out of the picture, and no new forward having come in for Brentford yet, Mbeumo's probably going to play up front in a season where he's been put as a midfielder in FPL. So he was a forward last year. Not only that, he's probably going to take penalties as well. And his underlying numbers were really good last year. So I think if I'm spending 6.5, as it stands, the top 2 players for me are probably going to be Mbeumo or Matoma. There are other ways to play this. Instead of Rashford, I can have a 5.5 million defender. That would then let me spend 8 to 9 million on midfielder. So I could look at Foden, Son, Fernandes, maybe Odegaard in there as well. So it's not a guarantee that I go for 2 6.5s. But I think if I am, they're probably my top 2 choices. Now, the most controversial pick is probably going to be Sterling, who was pretty awful from an FPL point of view last year. We know what he's capable of. He's an experienced player, done well at Liverpool, done great at Man City. Chelsea, since he's been there, have been a bit of a mess. Whether that's going to continue into this season, we'll have to see. But I think you have to expect that Chelsea are going to improve. I'm not saying they're going to go from 12th to 1st, but I think they're going to be competing for those top 6 spots again, right, under Pochettino. And we saw last year, players like Rashford went from like 9.5 million to 6.5, severely underpriced, then did really well. What we've come to expect from them in seasons gone past. And that's my thinking with Sterling. We know he's a player that can easily get 150 plus points. He's been 9, 10, 11 million in FPL. All of a sudden he's 7 million because he's had a really bad season. Can he outscore that price point? Absolutely. And if you look at his underlying numbers from last year, so if I go on to the Opta stats, right, and just search for Sterling, I always go per 90 minutes. Expected goals 0.19. Expected assists 0.19. Expected goals 0.33. That's not bad for a player that was, had a poor season, and also Chelsea were just pretty bad as well. Like, they are numbers that he can definitely improve on. If we look at another player like Maddison, for example, who's very popular at Spurs for 7.5, so he's a bit more expensive. Let me see, where is he now? Maddison's here. So you got 0.31 expected goals, so slightly worse goal threat, slightly higher, assist potential. But I just think with Sterling, he's a little bit cheaper, playing in a team that I would probably expect to score more goals next year. And we know he's capable of doing better than that. I just think for 7 million, he's a risk that might be worth taking. The only thing I'm thinking about is he's got Liverpool at home in game week 1. Now, Chelsea's fixtures are pretty good after that, but because of how many people play FPL now, there's a lot of knee-jerking that goes on after game week 1, and it is obviously possible that Sterling could blank in that fixture, and then all of a sudden his price might start to go down, because West Ham away is not a bad fixture, but it's not one where you would go and rush out and get an attacker. So if he blanks against Liverpool and then he's got West Ham away, people will start selling him. And that's my worry, that I'll suddenly start losing money and I have to try and hold my nerve through to these fixtures, which are Luton, Forest, Bournemouth, which are pretty good fixtures for game weeks 3, 4 and 5. So again, Sterling is not a dead cert for points, but if we're putting a slight differential in there with a chance to absolutely play above his price, then I think he's one of those players. And then my two up front are Haaland and Gabriel Jesus. Now, the 4.5 million forward, I've just put that as a placeholder right now. I'm not going to spend too much brain power thinking about exactly who that should be. That's the kind of decision that can be made much closer to game week 1. In terms of Haaland, I don't think I really need to spend a huge amount of time telling you why he's in this draft. Even though he's gone up to 14 million, he's well worth it because I can just basically captain him every single game week. And we saw last year how little he was rotated. The only real time it happened was when he had an injury, which makes sense, right? When players are injured, they can't play. Or later on in the season when the Premier League was won and they had Champions League and stuff like that. Pretty much every other game week where he was fit and available, he started for Man City. So I just cannot go without him. I know I don't have Salah in this draft. I am going to think about whether or not it's possible to get him in. I do like the option of captaining Salah in game week 2 against Bournemouth at home. And a lot of people have talked about that that game week. Well, what are you going to do with Haaland because he's got Newcastle at home? Well, guess what? If I don't have Salah for game week 2 and I've got Haaland against Newcastle at home, do you know who I'm going to captain? I'm going to captain Haaland against Newcastle at home. I just don't think it's that big of an issue. So he is definitely in. With Gabriel Jesus, he is definitely not the most exciting second Arsenal attacker. I think if they were nailed on to play every single game, then Odegaard and Martinelli are probably better. But in terms of setup in my squad, the forward choices for 6 to 6.5 million are just not ideal compared to the midfield choices we have for the same price. So I've gone for, let's say, Mbeumo and Jesus. I could have Calvert-Lewin and Odegaard. And that combination might be better if I'm confident that Calvert-Lewin can stay fit. Because at 6 million, with the fixtures that Everton have, I really like him as an option. But am I confident enough that Calvert-Lewin and Odegaard is a better combination than Mbeumo and Gabriel Jesus? I'm not sure. All I know is if I can, I want 2 Arsenal attackers. I know the issue with Jesus. He always has really high expected goals. Again, if we go and quickly check what it was last year, this actually works really smooth. Very, very quick. Gabriel J... In fact, let me just put... I just said it's worked really quick, and then I've made the mistake. Yeah, there he is. Gabriel Jesus. That was me, not the site. Expected assist 0.27. Expected goals 0.64. I know he usually underperforms on his XG, but it's so high that you always expect goals from him. And I do think he's going to be fairly nailed. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with Havertz, what position he plays in. A lot of people are saying that he's come in to kind of replace Xhaka, so he's going to be like a number 8, obviously getting forward and stuff like that. I think Gabriel Jesus is going to start the season without too many issues on his minutes. The only thing is, he could get subbed off early. If Havertz doesn't start, he could play up front. If Trossard doesn't start, he can play as the number 9 as well. They've still got Nketiah, Balogun, etc. So there are other options that Arsenal or Arteta could use instead of Jesus. But I think he's probably going to start the season. I think he basically solves an issue. And the issue is, which forwards do you go for 7 million or less? I don't think right now there's any dead certs, which is why Jesus is in. But like I said, I could easily switch that around. So looking at that team, Haaland basically permanent captain unless he gets injured. Absolutely 100% nailed in this team. Saka like 99% nailed. Everyone else really up for debate. And I'm surprising because I think a lot of the prices are quite cheap. But at the same time, that gives us lots of options to think about. So I'm finding it a bit more difficult than normal to get a bunch of players in that I'm absolutely sure will be in that game week 1 squad. I mean, Mitoma, Rashford, Trent, Estepinian and Gabriel all got really good chances, but by no means are they locked in right now. So let me know how your drafting is going in the comments below. If you have enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like if you haven't done so already. Help me hit 400,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. Loads of more content to come throughout pre-season. And if you haven't already checked out Fantasy Football Hub, make sure you do. Link in the description below.